Jasmine Crockett leaned forward in the economic policy hearing and pointed her finger at Vivek Ramaswamy with righteous fury. "You're nothing but an exploitative capitalist who profits off worker exploitation," she declared with passionate conviction. Crockett's progressive audience nodded approvingly, thinking their representative had delivered the perfect socialist takedown. But what Crockett didn't know was that Vivek had researched her complete economic ignorance and anti-business voting record. Vivek's response about job creation versus job destruction would completely destroy her credibility and expose the ultimate economic illiterate. The House Committee on Financial Services hearing room was filled with tension on this humid Wednesday morning in Washington. The ornate chamber, with its formal portraits and mahogany furnishings, had witnessed countless debates over economic policy throughout the decades, but what was about to unfold would become one of the most explosive confrontations between capitalism and socialism in congressional history. The hearing was focused on economic inequality and the role of corporations in American society, topics that had become increasingly polarized in recent years. The committee had invited various witnesses to testify about everything from wage policies to corporate governance, creating a perfect storm for ideological conflict. Jasmine Crockett sat at her position on the committee with the intensity that had made her a rising star among progressive activists. Her perfectly styled hair and professional attire projected the image of a serious legislator, but her eyes carried the fire of someone who genuinely believed that capitalism was the root of America's problems. Since arriving in Congress, Crockett had built her brand on fiery rhetoric about economic justice and corporate accountability. She had positioned herself as a champion of working families against what she portrayed as exploitative business practices that enriched the wealthy at the expense of ordinary Americans. Across the committee table sat Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been invited to provide the business perspective on economic policy proposals. He wore a sharp navy suit, his demeanor calm but alert, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had actually built successful companies rather than just criticized them. Vivek's presence at the hearing was notable because he represented everything that progressive politicians like Crockett claimed to oppose: a young, successful entrepreneur who had built wealth through innovation and business acumen rather than government programs or political connections. The hearing had proceeded through various testimony from policy experts and advocacy groups, with the usual partisan divisions becoming apparent in the questioning and responses. Democratic committee members focused on inequality and corporate power, while Republicans emphasized job creation and economic growth. That's when Crockett decided to make her move. She had been waiting for the right moment to deploy her signature anti-capitalist rhetoric, and she sensed an opportunity when the discussion turned to the role of entrepreneurs and business leaders in addressing economic challenges. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of righteous indignation that had made her a favorite among progressive activists, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room here. We're having a discussion about economic inequality as if all of the witnesses in this room have the same commitment to actually solving the problem." The setup was classic Crockett, positioning herself as the authentic voice of economic justice while preparing to attack those who disagreed with her socialist approach. The Democratic members of the committee leaned forward with anticipation, ready for another viral moment from their rising star. "We have people in this room who represent the very system that has created the inequality we're supposed to be addressing," Crockett continued, her voice growing more pointed. "We have representatives of corporate interests who profit from keeping wages low, from denying workers benefits, from extracting wealth from communities while giving nothing back." The attack was becoming more personal, and everyone in the room could sense that Crockett was building toward a specific target. This wasn't going to be a general policy critique. This was going to be a directed assault designed to create a viral moment and score political points with her base. "We have people who have made fortunes by exploiting the very workers they now claim to care about," Crockett said, her finger beginning to rise in Vivek's direction. "People who talk about job creation while they're actually engaged in wealth extraction, who speak about economic opportunity while they're destroying economic security for millions of Americans." The room was growing tense, and Republican committee members were beginning to shift uncomfortably as they realized where this was heading. Crockett was preparing to launch a personal attack that would turn the hearing into political theater. "Mr. Ramaswamy," Crockett said, her voice rising with indignation, her finger pointing directly at Vivek like an accusation made flesh. "You sit there talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, but let's be honest about what you really represent." The attack was now completely personal, and everyone in the room could feel the energy shifting from policy discussion to ideological warfare. "You're nothing but an exploitative capitalist who profits off worker exploitation," Crockett declared, her voice echoing through the chamber with socialist fury. "You represent everything that's wrong with our economic system, everything that keeps working families struggling while billionaires get richer." She leaned back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered what she believed was a devastating blow, expecting the room to erupt in applause from progressive supporters, while Vivek struggled to defend himself against charges of worker exploitation. But what Crockett didn't realize was that she had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. She had assumed that her progressive rhetoric and her position as a congresswoman would be enough to intimidate someone she clearly viewed as just another greedy businessman. She had no idea that she was about to confront someone who had done extensive research on her own economic record and anti-business positions. "Congresswoman Crockett," Vivek said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made everyone in the room pay attention, "I appreciate your passion for economic justice. I really do. But I have to ask you something, and I think the American people deserve to hear your answer." The tone of the conversation was shifting, and Crockett's confident expression began to falter slightly. She had expected Vivek to become defensive about his wealth or to offer some weak justification for capitalism. Instead, he was turning the tables and going on the offensive. "You just called me an exploitative capitalist who profits off worker exploitation," Vivek continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You suggested that I represent everything wrong with our economic system. You positioned yourself as a champion of working families against greedy business interests." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze steady and unwavering. "But I have to ask you, Congresswoman, what in your own record qualifies you to lecture anyone about job creation or worker welfare? What have you actually done to create opportunities for the working families you claim to represent?" The question hit the room like a thunderbolt, and the audience fell into an uncomfortable silence. This wasn't how these hearings usually went. Business representatives were supposed to be defensive, apologetic, easily intimidated by progressive moral authority. "Because when I look at your voting record," Vivek continued, his voice carrying across the room with unmistakable authority, "I don't see someone who's fighting for workers. I see someone who's systematically voting to destroy the very jobs that working families depend on." He pulled out a document from his folder, and the gesture was both theatrical and ominous. "Let me share some facts with this committee. Since you've been in Congress, you voted against every single piece of legislation designed to support small businesses. Every single one." The room was dead silent now, the atmosphere completely transformed from progressive celebration to shocked attention. Crockett sat rigid in her chair, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized where this was heading. "You voted against the Small Business Relief Act," Vivek continued, consulting his notes. "You voted against tax credits for startups. You voted against regulatory reform that would have made it easier for entrepreneurs to create businesses and hire workers." The voting record was devastating, and everyone in the room could feel the energy completely shift. The committee members who had been ready to cheer Crockett's attack on capitalism were now sitting in stunned silence, confronted with evidence of her anti-business positions. "But it gets worse," Vivek said, his voice rising with conviction. "You've consistently supported policies that actively destroy jobs. You voted for regulations that make it more expensive to hire workers. You supported mandates that force small businesses to choose between compliance costs and staying afloat." The pattern was becoming clear, and it painted a picture of someone whose policies consistently harmed the very people she claimed to represent. "You called me exploitative," Vivek continued, "but let's talk about what's really exploitative. What's exploitative is convincing working families that government dependence is better than job opportunities. What's exploitative is destroying the businesses that could employ them while promising government programs that never deliver. The attack was devastating because it highlighted the fundamental contradiction in Crockett's approach. How could someone who consistently voted against job creation credibly attack job creators? Let me tell you about my own record, Vivek said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. I've built companies that employ thousands of people, real jobs with real paychecks, providing real opportunities for working families to build better lives. He looked directly at Crockett. These aren't government jobs that depend on taxpayer funding. These aren't make-work programs that disappear when political priorities change. These are productive jobs in the private sector, creating value that benefits everyone. The distinction between private sector job creation and government employment was stark and undeniable. One created wealth, the other consumed it. My pharmaceutical company alone employs over 1,500 people, Vivek continued, pulling out another document. Research scientists, manufacturing workers, administrative staff, sales representatives. All of them earning good wages, all of them contributing to their communities, all of them building careers and supporting families. The specific numbers were powerful because they represented real people with real livelihoods, not abstract policy discussions. But here's what really bothers me about your approach, Congresswoman, Vivek said, his voice becoming more pointed. You attack job creators while you've never created a single job yourself. You criticize business success while you've never built a successful business. You lecture about worker exploitation while you've never actually employed workers. The room was completely silent now, everyone absorbing the devastating exposure of Crockett's lack of real-world experience. Your entire career has been in government, Vivek continued. You went from law school to political activism to elected office. You've never met payroll, never worried about keeping a business afloat, never faced the real-world challenges of creating and maintaining employment for other people. The attack on Crockett's lack of business experience was particularly effective because it highlighted how disconnected she was from the actual process of job creation. Yet you feel qualified to judge entrepreneurs, Vivek said, his voice rising with indignation. You feel entitled to attack business leaders, to determine what's exploitative and what's beneficial, to lecture people who have actually created jobs about worker welfare. The fundamental absurdity of Crockett's position was being exposed in real time. How could someone with no business experience credibly attack those who had actually built successful companies? And let's talk about your understanding of basic economics, Vivek continued, pulling out what appeared to be his most damaging evidence. Last month, you gave a speech where you claimed that raising the minimum wage to $25 per hour would have no negative effects on employment. The audience was shifting uncomfortably now, many recognizing the economic illiteracy of such a statement. $25 per hour, Congresswoman, Vivek repeated, letting the number sink in. That's over $50,000 per year for entry-level positions. Do you have any idea what that would do to small businesses? Do you understand the economic impact of more than doubling labor costs overnight? The questions highlighted Crockett's fundamental ignorance of basic economic principles that every business owner understood intuitively. You also claimed that corporate profits are stolen from workers, Vivek continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine incredulity. You suggested that business success is automatically evidence of worker exploitation. That's not economic analysis, Congresswoman. That's Marxist ideology. The ideological foundation of Crockett's thinking was being exposed, revealing her anti-capitalist worldview that saw all business success as inherently illegitimate. But here's what you don't understand about profits, Vivek said, his voice becoming more educational. Profits are what allow businesses to expand, to hire more workers, to invest in research and development, to weather economic downturns without laying people off. He looked around the committee room, making eye contact with other members. Profits aren't stolen from workers. They're what make it possible to employ workers in the first place. They're what create the capital necessary for job creation and economic growth. The basic economic education was powerful because it highlighted how Crockett's anti-profit rhetoric actually undermined the interests of the workers she claimed to represent. And let's talk about the practical consequences of your economic policies, Vivek continued, his momentum building. You represent a district in Texas, but you consistently vote for policies that would drive businesses out of Texas and into other states or other countries. The geographic irony was particularly damaging because it showed how Crockett's policies would harm her own constituents. You support regulations that make American manufacturing less competitive, Vivek said. You advocate for tax policies that encourage businesses to relocate overseas. You promote labor policies that price American workers out of global markets. The pattern of job-destroying policies was becoming clear, and it painted a picture of someone whose ideology consistently trumped practical considerations. So when you call me exploitative, Vivek said, his voice reaching a crescendo, I have to ask, what's more exploitative? Creating jobs that allow people to support their families through productive work, or destroying those jobs through misguided policies, and then promising government assistance that never comes? The question was devastating because it highlighted the fundamental difference between empowering people through opportunity and keeping them dependent through welfare. You attack capitalism, Vivek continued. But capitalism is what has lifted more people out of poverty than any other economic system in human history. It's what has created the prosperity that allows us to have social safety nets in the first place. The broader defense of capitalism was particularly powerful because it placed the debate in historical and global context, showing how Crockett's ideology had failed everywhere it had been tried. And you know what I find most insulting about your approach? Vivek asked, his voice taking on a tone of genuine anger. You claim to speak for working families while you attack the very system that creates opportunities for those families. You position yourself as their champion while you support policies that destroy their chances for advancement. The betrayal of working families was a particularly powerful theme because it showed how Crockett's rhetoric masked policies that actually harmed the people she claimed to represent. Let me tell you what real worker advocacy looks like, Vivek continued, his voice reflecting both passion and knowledge. Real advocacy means creating conditions where workers can find good jobs, where they can advance based on their skills and effort, where they can build careers that provide security and opportunity for their families. The contrast between Crockett's government dependency approach and actual economic empowerment was becoming clear, and it highlighted the fundamental difference between socialist and capitalist approaches to worker welfare. Real advocacy means supporting the businesses that employ workers, Vivek said. It means understanding that worker welfare and business success are complementary, not contradictory. It means recognizing that the best anti-poverty program is a job. The committee room was completely captivated now, everyone recognizing the truth of Vivek's argument in their own understanding of how the economy actually worked. But your approach does the opposite, Vivek continued, his voice growing stronger. You demonize employers while making it harder for them to hire. You attack success while supporting policies that prevent people from achieving it. You promise government solutions while destroying the private sector foundation that makes those solutions possible. The systematic critique of progressive economic policy was devastating because it showed how each element undermined the others, creating a self-defeating cycle of dependency and decline. So Congresswoman Crockett, Vivek said, beginning to gather his papers, the next time you want to attack someone for worker exploitation, maybe you should examine your own record of voting against job creation. The next time you want to lecture someone about economic justice, maybe you should consider the justice of destroying opportunities for the people you represent. He stood up, preparing to leave, but he wasn't finished. And the next time you want to criticize capitalism, maybe you should explain why every alternative has led to poverty, oppression, and economic collapse. His final words would echo in that committee room long after the hearing was over. I'll keep building businesses, creating jobs, and providing opportunities for working families to achieve the American dream. You can keep attacking the system that makes that dream possible while offering nothing but government dependency in return. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Crockett sat motionless in her chair, her anti-capitalist authority completely destroyed by the exposure of her own anti-business record and economic ignorance. Her progressive rhetoric and righteous indignation had been turned against her, revealing the hollow core of her socialist ideology. The other committee members sat in stunned silence, many clearly recognizing the fundamental contradictions in progressive economic policy that Vivek had exposed. The hearing had become an education in basic economics that highlighted the difference between creating wealth and redistributing it. The confrontation between Vivek Ramaswamy and Jasmine Crockett had exposed something crucial about modern American politics: the dangerous disconnect between progressive rhetoric and economic reality. It had highlighted how socialist policies consistently harmed the very people they claimed to help. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that all the progressive passion in the world couldn't overcome the simple truth that prosperity required production, that worker welfare depended on business success, and that the American people deserved leaders who understood how to create opportunities rather than destroy them. The age of unquestioned progressive economic authority was over. The age of demanding results from economic policies had begun. And it had started with an entrepreneur from Ohio who had the courage to challenge a socialist from Texas with the most powerful weapon in politics: the truth about what actually created jobs and prosperity.